Welcome to day 215 on the trail. We have four readings for today from Mark 14, verses 26 through 52, 1 Kings 8, verses 1 through 66, 2 Chronicles 6, verse 1 through 7, verse 11, and 4 Maccabees chapter 9, verses 10 through 32. Today, we will focus our time on the account of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane and his arrest and betrayal. In our introduction to the Gospel of Mark, we discussed Mark's use of triads, or groups of three. In our reading from chapter 14, we will find several of these triads. We begin with our first set of three, found in Mark 14, verses 26 through 31. When they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said to them, "You will all become deserters, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even though all become deserters, I will not." Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this day, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said vehemently, "Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you." And all of them said the same. Peter will not deny Jesus once, but 3 times before the cock crows twice, announcing that morning has arrived. Why does Jesus mention the cock crowing as the sun rises above the horizon? In fact, this detail is mentioned in all 4 Gospels. So why is this so important? Why does Jesus not simply say, "Peter, before morning comes, you will deny me 3 times"? Perhaps the chronology of Peter's third denial was really not important, but the imagery was. Jesus seems more concerned about Peter's ability to see, his willingness to examine himself, and his trust in Jesus, especially as the night unfolds. The crowing cock calls to mind the first part of the daily Jewish morning prayer, which says, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who endows the rooster with the ability to distinguish day and night." In a sense, Jesus seems to be saying to Peter, "Peter, the cock has the ability to distinguish between day and night, between light and darkness, but not you. Peter, do you still not see? Do you still not understand what you said when you called me the Messiah?" Upon the arrival of Jesus and his disciples at Gethsemane, we find 2 more sets of 3. Jesus takes 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, the same disciples who experienced Jesus' transfiguration, a little further into the garden, and asks them to stay awake and pray. Beginning in verse 32. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me. Yet, not what I want, but what you want." He came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour?" But 3 times, Jesus will return only to find his inner 3 fast asleep. In all 3 synoptic Gospels, we are told that the disciples are asleep when Jesus has asked them to pray in his distress. This is perhaps one of the more violent acts in the story of Jesus' arrest and betrayal. Imagine if you or I had shared something deeply troubling and especially painful with a close friend, and instead of showing concern, they ignored or minimized your suffering. What if they fell asleep when you needed them most? This happens to Jesus, not once, but 3 times. Before we leave this passage, I would also like to discuss a common error regarding the Aramaic word Abba, which is used in verse 36. Some have argued that Abba could be used by children to address their father, or a father figure, and therefore could be translated as daddy. However, this approach is based on Jewish writings from the Babylonian Talmud, which are dated several centuries after the New Testament. Instead, it is much more likely that the Aramaic Abba should be properly translated simply as the Father. In fact, in Aramaic, the definite article, the word the, is placed at the end of the word Av, which is the same word used for father in Hebrew. So the Hebrew word for the Father would be Ha'av. In Aramaic, the same word would be Abba. This distinction will play a very important role in the Gospel of Matthew when we come to the story of the great exchange between Judas and Barabbas. Finally, I believe there are 3 acts of violence in Gethsemane. The first we have already discussed, when Jesus returns to find his closest followers sleeping. The second act of violence occurs with the arrival of Judas. Verse 43. Immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. And with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him, and lead him away under guard." So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus is betrayed by one of his disciples with a kiss, a sign of affection and respect. Using this respectful, personal greeting heightens Judas' villainy and demonstrates his hypocrisy. Again, betraying a teacher and friend using such a hypocritical overture of respect could be considered a personally violent act. Finally, our third act of violence occurs after Jesus' arrest. Then they laid hands on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to them, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I was with you in the temple, teaching, and you did not arrest me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled." All of them deserted him and fled. The sword is the final act of violence in the garden. This part of the account also appears in all 4 Gospels. However, each has a slightly different emphasis. Matthew adds a rebuke by Jesus, saying, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword." Luke, the physician, says that Jesus heals the man who is struck. And John identifies the one who was struck as Malchus, and the one who struck him as Peter. But in each gospel, Jesus has clearly decided to follow the will of his Father, that his hour has come to offer his life for the sake of the world. And with that decision, the disciples deserted him and fled into the night, leaving their teacher and Lord alone. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.